Good morning, and welcome to Explorers Forum on Sunday, April 25th. Today, David Teeger will report on the work of the Transition Task Force and the recently completed mission study, which is a critical step in the process for searching for a new pastor. David, thank you for your leadership of the task force and for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Explorers Forum was kind enough to open up a week in their schedule for us to present the next step in the transition process. So this is the work of the Transition Task Force, a follow-up to what we presented 2 months ago at the February meeting of the congregation, annual meeting of the congregation. So just to say what the next steps were. So I will go through the process a bit, and both what we have accomplished and the steps yet to come. And then I will talk about the contents of the report itself. So let's step forward through this and see how it goes. So there's what the front page of it looks like, although given a few minor updates, I changed the date to April 21st when you see the official report. So took that picture recently during one of the first Friday walks. So this is the team that wrote the report. So it's Terry, Bill, Mark, Sarah, Jeanette, and myself. So I have to give so much thanks to these people for the tremendous job that they did. And as I go through, I'll talk about the various components that they worked on and how we stitched it all together. Special thanks to Bill Hathaway, who didn't have to write any of it himself, but he was the primary sort of sounding board. As everybody would write their sections, they would pass them through Bill before they came to me. So the report has 23 pages, 11,033 words, 19 pictures, more than 24 web links. I kind of lost count at some point when there were duplicates, and 3 appendices, which also link to some external documents for supporting information. And we'll be making this available to the congregation this week. It needs to go out with a little bit of explanation, particularly in how you access the appendices and things like that. And for reasons that I'll explain in a minute, we will also have this living somewhere on the church's website. So going through this process again, these are the steps that I went through, slightly revised now at the annual meeting of the congregation. So when Doug left, the presbytery says, here's our book of order, and this is the way things are done, which is great in a lot of ways, because we know exactly what to expect during the process. So first, the pastor announces departure. You talk to the presbytery so you can get advice from them. And you begin a quick interim search process. So this also involves a ministry information form, or the MIF, that I'll be talking about later. But because you're looking for an interim, a lot of it is sort of condensed. You don't have as much to process in getting that in place. So that process is run by a committee of session, sort of an ad hoc committee of session. The interim arrives, and interim pastors are typically called for 1-year contracts that you renew as needed. And most interims complete their work within 2 years, meaning that you've got a new pastor has arrived. So from there, you form a mission study group. Here we called it the Transition Task Force, which gave us a little bit broader responsibility. So it remains to be seen now that the mission study is done, whether we actually are dismissed or whether Sam wants us to do more work. So we're negotiating some of those points right now. So again, these are members appointed by session, and in this case contains both people who are on session and people who are not on session. So that's reporting to the session. And that group has 4 main tasks. I'll list those out in a moment. So it's basically, since it's a mission study group, you're going to study things. So the 4 main tasks relate to that. And then after you've completed those tasks, you complete the mission study report. And that brings us to the next page, where we've done this, and there's an approval decision. So that has to be approved both by session and representatives of the presbytery. And I am very pleased to announce that As of Thursday, this was approved by both session and the representatives of the presbytery. So that's good news. It means we can go on to the next steps, which are to elect the pastor nominating committee. Now, this will be 6 to 8 members elected by the congregation and therefore reporting back to the congregation, not a body of session. And we expect that we will have some overlap of the task force members and the PNC members. That slate, I think, will be presented. Was it in this week's bulletin? I haven't looked at this week's bulletin to see. If not, it will be in next week's bulletin in advance of the May 2nd election. Okay, that's good news. All right, and then their job is to prepare the ministry information form. So that serves basically as a job description for the next pastor. There are some decisions that have to be made as you're preparing that. Mostly it's what is going to be the role or the title of the pastor that you're bringing in. So it's sort of like when you find those drop-down lists on government sites as to what your title is, and it starts with Mr. and Mrs. and goes all the way through ambassador and things like that. So there's a long list of possible roles there. And I'll talk about what we expect the role for this congregation to be. Right, so then this is an electronic form that gets uploaded into a sort of database matching service. There is an approval process for that before you can actually upload it. And then once that's in place, then potential pastors can see this form and what the bare bones of what the church is looking for. And as they get more interested, they'll come poking around our website and can access the mission study report and other information about the church. But it also lets the members of the PNC into looking around for pastors who might match from our perspective. So it's a nice sort of two-way job application process. So that's the pastoral search part of the job. And then the pastor is called. And of course, the timing at this point is kind of in God's hands. I'm sure that the team will work with due haste in getting up the ministry information form uploaded and doing their part of the pastoral search. But I see Gene Thompson's face there. I'm sure he can tell us how that process went when we called Doug, the sort of timing of everything that happened there. So we just kind of wait, make that happen. And then the end of the flow chart says that we install the new pastor. All right. If there are any questions on the process, people can raise their hands or put that in the chat, and I'd ask the moderator then to sort of flag those for me and we can answer them as I go along. Okay, so the mission study, as I said, had 4 tasks. The first one we described as discerning the mind of the congregation. So this is a slightly big umbrella talking about the congregation, its demographics, what they want, what they hope, what their memories are. It talks about how the church has dealt with conflict in the past, and covers a lot of ground that way, just to basically say, these are our people, and this is what we're hoping for, where God is calling us. Right? The second is discerning the needs of our community. So the team, the sort of sub-team that worked on that, talked to community leaders, talked to other pastors in the area, looked at the demographics of the community to see how the church is situated, who our neighbors are, and who we might be serving, and worked on that part of it. The third part is discerning the assets of the congregation. This one largely fell to Mark Olson, as his position on the finance committee of session gave him ready access to much of the information that was needed. But we talked about the assets, including the physical building, the monetary assets, the giving levels, things like that. So I'll discuss each of these in a little bit more detail as we go through. And then really the fourth task is to knit all this together into the mission study report. So I had the individual members of these sub-teams put together text covering what it was they had covered. And then I worked to sort of knit them all together into a single report. I think I got that on this one, right? So woven together, really, there was a lot of weaving, a lot of trimming of loose ends, a lot of making sure that we were consistent from one part of the report to the other about what we said, making sure that we weren't overly redundant in having different sections say the same things over and over again. But it really outlines the current state of the church and pointing to the possible futures for the congregation. So that was fun. So we started all of this work of actually writing the reports immediately after the annual meeting of the congregation. And I think it's worth saying that at that point, based on mutual agreement, Sam stepped away from the process and let us do this independently. So in some churches, that's not the case, and the interim pastor will continue to work on the mission study report. But Sam felt it was best that we sort of carry this out ourselves. And then at the end, when we got everything sort of put together, we reviewed the drafts with Sam before we shared it with the session, just to make sure that we hadn't missed anything. So here's my next point. So in the report, in addition to those 3 individual tasks, the discernment tasks that I talked about, we added a foreword, a little longer introduction, and then a concluding section, of course, that's discerning the call for a pastor. And then supported that with appendices and added pictures and things like that, as I've said. Right, so important thing to remember is that, you know, we write this report and it doesn't just exist in a vacuum. So it has 3 main purposes, but they're not equal purposes. They're sort of in order of decreasing importance here. So the first, as I've said, is that it is the groundwork for the pastor nominating committee to complete the mission information form. So I believe when we when we did the interim tasks for before Doug came, this started, you know, nearly 20 years ago at this point. It was a single team that carried this work all the way through. They did the mission study and they did the ministry information form. I think it's ministry information form and not mission information form. Carried that all the way through as one body. So at this time, we're having this handoff. Again, I said the team is going to have some overlap, but in this case, the report is sort of the groundwork for the work that the pastor nominating committee is going to do. Right. The second point is that it really is a prospectus for potential pastors. As I said, this will be public in such a way that either someone can ask for it or they could find it on our website. So usually that's once a contact is made, you started to negotiate as to whether this person's good for the job, and they'll say, well, can I see your mission study report? And you'll say, gladly, here it is. So it has to kind of walk a balance, right? This is a job application, it says that we're hiring at this church. So you have to be careful that you want the church to look attractive to a potential pastor. You don't want to scare anyone away. But at the same time, you have to be honest enough to say that, you know, we have our faults, and these are the places where it could be exciting for a new pastor to come in and help us. So it has to be honest that way. And in that same sense, this really then serves as a historical document for the church. So it's been 20 years since the last mission study report. We have the more recent Vision 2020 report is also a historical document for the church, but this one, given the other purposes that this document has, is a little fuller bodied and contains some things, even the demographic studies that the Vision 2020 report suggested that the church undertake in order to get a better view of what our local mission could be. Okay, so like I said, it needs to be honest while making us attractive to potential pastors. So it's nice that way. And the hope is that it's a good looking document and well written so that they see the quality of the people that we are at the church. So that's good too. All right, so when that goes to the process for creating the MIF, and I'll correct these because I'm pretty sure it is ministry information form and not mission information form. But you go through tick boxes for the congregation size, its demographic makeup, its racial makeup. You go through just the church mission and vision statements that exist already for the church. The basic description of the call, which I said is that sort of long list of potential role titles. And for us, the one that's really at the top of the list is solo pastor. So that's the most common thing I imagine that these forms are used for, but that carries with it some responsibilities that I'll talk about when I get to the end. You list in negotiating here with the finance group and the personnel committee, the minimum and maximum effective salaries. The minimum becomes part of the public form, whereas the maximum is hidden from anyone who looks at it. It's just sort of the presbytery has access to that, but potential people don't, so that you don't get someone who comes in and highballs what your salary might be. All right, and then there's a little section at the end for references and endorsements and things like that, so that they have contact. So like I said, it's then uploaded to a search database to make that easy for the search process. But the bulk of the form is a set of narrative questions and also sort of a menu of desired leadership qualifications. So you get to pick the combo deal that best suits your congregational needs. Don't look too closely at that. So the narrative questions, there are 5 of them, and I'll go ahead and include them here so that people can think about what the pastor nominating committee has to wrestle with, and perhaps this will help guide your thoughts and prayers around the issue and any opinions that you might have that you want to voice to the members of the PNC in the event that you might feel different from what the mission study report says. So what's the congregation's vision for ministry, and describe how this vision is lived out. Second question is, how do you feel called to reach out to address the emerging needs of your community or constituency? The third is, how will this position help you to reach your vision and mission goals? Fourth is, provide a description of the characteristics needed by the person open to being called to this congregation and or organization. For us, it's just congregation, but if you were searching for an officer of the presbytery, it goes through the same process. And 5, for what specific tasks, assignments, and program areas will this person have responsibility? This is sort of the nuts and bolts of the job description, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of what the responsibilities are going to be. So if you look at those first 4 questions, though, you'll see how they lined up fairly well with a number of the questions that we asked in the questionnaire in January and February. So we were trying to get the information, discerning the mind of the congregation in that case, as to how we would go about answering these questions or preparing the information that would support answering these questions in the MIF. All right, and then when you get to these categories of leadership qualifications, think of them as you've got a menu and it has under appetizers, you've got 5 options, and under main courses and side dishes and desserts, you've got these options. So the first set is theological or spiritual interpreter, and there are 6 dish options. For under communication, you have 5 options. Under organizational leadership, there are 15 options. That's the biggest chunk. So think of that as perhaps main courses. Interpersonal engagement, 7 options. And the challenge is that we only get to choose 10 dishes from the menu. So out of those, however many there are, 31, I think, you only get to choose 10. So that's the hard work of the PNC, is to figure out how you sort of top level, this is the kind of person we want in terms of leadership qualifications. So while our report doesn't answer these questions or make those menu choices directly, it is full of guidance. So the pastor nominating committee should be able to read the lines and read between the lines and fairly quickly come up with answers to those narrative questions and to making those menu choices. So the idea is to build the healthiest plate for First and Central for what we want to serve. Right. Any questions coming through? I haven't seen anything come up, so I will press ahead then.
None so far.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Press ahead with sort of a breakdown. Oh, sorry, I got this. If you remember this from the annual meeting, we had to look at this time, at this sort of idea of where we are at the church and where we want to move forward. So you could get to this idea that you just do nothing and say it is impossible, or you can see the wider view and say just do it, nothing is impossible. So with that in mind, I'll step through the report section by section. This is sort of a preview just for what you would get through. So the introduction describes us as a church at a crossroads. It sets up the sort of craziness that was the year 2020 for First and Central and for the country, and recognizes that we're sort of jolted into a new vision and a new mission. This plays on some of the things that came through from the Vision 2020 report, but actually sort of recognizing that the last year and the change in leadership gives us new power to see new things. So put on new glasses if you want. It goes through the process of what the Transition Task Force, who we are, what we did, how we met, things like that, nuts and bolts of that. And then talks about the process of discernment and lists out those tasks that I described before. So section 2 is the one on discerning the mind of the congregation. So we talk about the history of the church in 2 blocks, one from its founding, and then a second block for the legacy of recent years, basically covering the last 25 years of the church and talking about the leadership, changes in leadership, the programs that have come in, the programs that have gone by the wayside, and tries to cover that all honestly. Again, this is a chance for us to show how the congregation deals with adversity, which we've had some years of adversity, and also how we deal with years where things are going really well, what sort of new things that we've come up with, and what's been working for the church. It talks about the people of the church, from the sort of basics of who's in the pews on Sunday mornings, through where people live. Sort of an interesting note was that our congregation, the sort of core congregation of the church, the people who are there regularly, come from 30 zip codes in the area. So that's a little nugget of information. And then we talked about the worship and mission life of the church. This is, what is First and Central? So painting the portrait of what First and Central is. So talking about the worship and music, talking about the education and mission programs from Explorers Forum through what we do with Friendship House. And a little section of public engagement is, how does the community see us? So it talks about the website. It talks about Market Street Music as a way of reaching out to the community. And I even slid in a reference to the ribbon project that's out on the front of the church right now. So, and then it also includes the congregational studies and surveys of recent years. So going back to when the Walker Trust first came in, and we talked about how we would use that money, then for the Vision 2020 surveys and report, and then the latest surveys through the transition tasks that we went through. And there's an appendix for this section that includes both the Vision 2020 report for reference and Sarah Ryan's excellent sort of overview analysis of the results from the congregational studies and the discussions that we had at the congregational meeting in the breakout rooms, and covers all of that in the appendix. So just these are some of the pictures that I've included in the report talking about our history and mission work. And there's, if you can imagine March 1st, 2020, when we were all together in Memorial Hall for the anniversary lunch, and how much we missed that. So let's get back there soon. So the next section is discerning the assets of the congregation. So it talks about the church staff and the gifts of the membership and the physical facility. So what that is, and the financial resources and liabilities. So if you attended the last two Explorers Forum sessions, you know all about the physical resources or the financial resources and liabilities. The physical facility, we have the picture of the sanctuary that I used on the previous slide, and talk about the fact really that the building for one that's almost 100 years is in excellent physical condition. And in particular, the nice things that we were able to do last year when the church was shut down and nobody was inside, that we got a lot of nice things done at the church. Gifts of the membership talks about not only stewardship aspects of it, what people pledge, what people give in terms of money, but what they give in terms of time and other services to the church. So that's listed there. And the church staff lists out who we have, how long they've served. It notes that Joanne is retiring and what the tentative plans are for replacing that position in ways perhaps of making that a slightly bigger role within the church, in the thought that we probably won't have an associate pastor in the future. So lays out the possibilities there. So yes, there's the picture of the sanctuary, the new really sort of assets of the renovated kitchen downstairs, and a picture of the third floor classrooms, which are currently vacant for the first time in nearly 10 years. So the fourth section, I was going to say, in the third section, the appendix is lists out the budget for the year and the expenditures and income for the last 2 years, just sort of financial supporting documents, like I said, as you would have seen from the last two Explorers Forum sessions. So for the fourth section is discerning the needs of the community, is where we talked to community leaders. We did the demographics to find out, first talking about the congregation and its situation in the city. So where is First and Central? What is around it? And while we're not really a church of our neighborhood, it's important that we recognize what our neighborhood is. The demographics using the Mission Insight database is something that was recommended by the Vision 2020 report. And it's something that the session had a group who was working on a project called the Unglued Project from the Presbytery. And they had started looking at some of this Mission Insight data as well. And then just looking sort of more broadly at the city and its needs. What's working in the city, what's hurting in the city, how is it changing for better or worse? And so there was some nice things to say there, and some stark realities as well. So in terms of an appendix for this section, if anybody really wants to look at the Excel database that I put together, where I gathered the Mission Insight, sort of relevant Mission Insight data from 10 different sectors of the city, plus the city as a whole and the greater Wilmington area, all the way up to the state line kind of thing. You can ask for those and investigate yourself. So lots of fun that was. So this is the map of the downtown development district, and the city presents this with everything tilted from reality. So I always have to change that so that it looks more like the way we know Wilmington. And then in terms of what we can offer the city, we've got the Memorial Hall that we use for winter sanctuary during the winter months in typical years. And again, those classrooms on the third floor could be converted into any number of possibilities for space. So the church will need to keep an open mind on what to do with that third floor space, with the hope that, even if these things don't bring in any significant money, they could be revenue neutral in some way, that we would have modest rents for that space that would help the community and, perhaps allow new businesses to get a foothold in the community and see how things like that go. Right. So looking in particular about what we saw for the city and its needs. This is an important section of the document that Terry Dykstra in particular gathered these together into sort of menu options again. And the church could decide to order any or all of these as ways of moving forward with the church. So working together on social justice, we obviously already have some of these things underway. But working together would be more outreach to more churches, perhaps figuring out ways to work with local governments, local police department, and see what we can do to help serve the city. The second one is recognizing that there are new people moving into downtown. That's not typical for many cities of Wilmington size, where people are still moving out of downtown. So there's new housing coming in. And with those new residents is the potential that people will be looking for ways to do good service within the community. We know about younger people that even if they're in that spiritual but not religious class, they might be willing to work with a church to do things that enrich them spiritually and enrich the city. So the arts community in Wilmington is also growing in the downtown sector. And prior to the pandemic, we had already started making more activity and being involved with the arts community. We were going to have the church open for the First Friday Arts Walks. So we hope that when those resume, the art on the town, I guess they call it, have the church open for that. A project that we are already moving forward with is the Kitchen Incubator, which is based out of Grace United Methodist Church, our neighbor up the street, that they may have people, what are we calling them? Culinary entrepreneurs, who might be able to use the kitchen to launch like a food truck business or a catering business, or to make breads or jams or things that they can sell outside the church. So starting out new businesses that way. There are a number of educational opportunities in downtown Wilmington with the Charter School of the Trades that's in town. There's an arts academy in town for younger students and some other programs. The church could play on its existing support of the LGBTQ plus community, not only hosting the pride dances that we've had in the church so far, but seeking new ways to look at the segment of this population that's often unchurched, but again might be willing to feed their spiritual needs through work with First and Central. So basically, let our pride flag fly, and work in that direction. And of course, we do want to continue and strengthen the established ministries. So in addition to the LGBTQ plus dances, we've had dances for the Down Syndrome Association of Delaware. We have Winter Sanctuary with Friendship House, and also the Emmanuel Dining Room services that we do. No need to turn our back on the church's long history of serving Meals on Wheels. And anything else that we can think of in reaching the city that we have done and would continue to do. Right. So that's a big chunk of the report, is making sure that we keep these things in mind and start to move the church forward in these new directions. None of these is a radical change in what we do, but it's really getting out of the community and making some of these things happen. So the fifth section, the concluding section, is discerning the call for a pastor. So the subheadings in this one are the voice of the congregation, the shape of the call, and a concluding section that's dancing into our call. So of course, we would love to have Jesus or one of the apostles dance in as the role for the new pastor, but we'll get a human, I'm sure. We'll get a nice human person with good character and some flaws as well. So even if we want Jesus to walk in the door, we might not like what he had to say, because that's often the case. That would be something, wouldn't it? So the voice of the congregation came from the surveys that we had done. And so in the report, Sarah again sort of distilled what the people said about what they would be looking for in a new pastor. And so we sort of let that stand as it was, again, not answering those questions directly for the narrative questions of the ministry information form, but letting the congregation's voice speak quite clearly there. When it came to the shape of the call, which is basically our team's conclusion, I'm going to subject you to direct quotations from the report, just so that we have everybody recognizing what we came through. So the role of the incoming pastor is that of solo pastor. As I said, that's a set title that's, from the drop-down menu of what you could call your incoming pastor. So those roles and responsibilities include, not excluded, not completely inclusive here. There are certainly other roles that would come along, but it's, preaching thoughtful and thought-provoking sermons, managing the church as head of staff, moderating the session and deacons, and ministering to the congregation in ways beyond the responsibility of the deacons. So that's the pastoral care aspect of being the pastor of the church, right? So I hope everyone's clear that all of those are, the new person coming in is going to be doing that sort of work. But when it comes to particular leadership needs, the pastor will serve as leader of the congregation as it sets its path for the future. So in recognition of the church's position at an inflection point, that's a slide that I used in the annual meeting. So we considered several options for defining the next pastor's primary leadership role. So I'll step through these one by one, just so that I could put them on bigger text on the slides. That's the last minute edit that I was doing. I hate this idea. We used, at my last job, we talked about having these wall of words slides and how much you should avoid them. But there's kind of not much way that I could avoid this. If we wanted to talk about these honestly and not have me paraphrase and stumble over myself trying to get these things right. So again, direct quotations here. Option one is to bring in a caretaker or a chaplain pastor who will minister the church membership, guard the endowment so that it sustains the existing church on its likely glide toward a quiet demise some years down the road. So if you remember that slide of the inflection point, this is the church coasting off into the sunset. And, we're not going to set any time limit on when that might happen. The church would certainly continue to do many of the programs that it has already. And the financial position is such that this, might be decades of gliding, but basically not doing much new. All right. Option two is the more radical move. So bringing in a bold, innovative pastor who will push the church toward a bold new trajectory, perhaps staying only a few years, because this can be a sort of confrontational role, and the skills that are needed for someone who does that might be the skills of someone that you really don't need as a long-term pastor, and that pastor might say, I've done my work and I'm gonna, take the next job, right? So perhaps only staying a few years, but setting up the church for a stark confrontation of its future. So as I said, this could be a possible role for a stated pastor that's not a long-term solo pastor, rather than a called pastor, but someone who really serves as a change agent. So that's to really shake things up. I imagine this is, Jesus walking in the door and making big changes that way. So this is a valid option, and there may be some people in the church who would choose option one, and some people in the church who would choose option two, and say, one thing or the other. And option three is something of a middle road. I don't want to think of it as sort of the a wimp out option, because I think this innovative pastor taking time to establish the long range plan for ministry in the community, that could be a big change for First and Central. That's really getting out into the community and working with the session to keep going some of the strong things that we've started in the last year, looking really seriously at that menu of options that we had for new ministries, and saying, no, you don't get to just pick one of these. You need to pick 3 of these, and you need to really do them, right? But that's where we put the third option. And so again, quoting from the report, we believe the pastor nominating committee, who gets to really make these decisions, should strike a course on the third path, seeking a pastor who will expand our ministry in the ways explored above and beyond. So we invite session of the PNC to discern the will of the congregation in seeking its next pastor. So that's sort of the toward the end. Terry wrote a lovely little final part for the entire report. That's worth reading, but I won't quote that here. I'll let you read that yourself and think about how you might dance into the future of First and Central. So again, just do it. Nothing is impossible. That's the mindset we have to think of. So conclusion, this is, I believe, the same slide that I used for the mission study report, or for the annual meeting. Using this quote from Hebrews that was the theme of the 100th anniversary campaign. And just, keep this in mind. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, surrounded by a cloud of witnesses cheering us on, and with Jesus as our model. Right. So there's time for discussion. I think I've left a little time. And Sue, I do have just a final slide that talks about, I don't know if you have one yourself for next week's Explorers Forum, but setting that up if you need me to show that. But other than that, I've just sort of opened this for discussion. And so is it best for me to stop sharing at this point, probably, and then we can all see each other?
I think that's a good idea. I do not have a final slide. I was going to say something, but if you have a final slide, that's great.
Okay, I can do that.
So
right,
I was going to say people could use the raise hand feature if you have questions, and I'll call on you.
Right. I see a number of the team members on the call as well. So it'd be great if anybody else wants to speak up. So hello, everybody that I didn't see before. Anyone have any questions? You're all looking forward to reading this thing, I hope. So we had a couple of example mission study reports to look at. One was from Newcastle Presbyterian and the other was from Concord Presbyterian. They were each 30 pages. And so we set ourselves a goal of getting it all done in 20 pages. So with a cover page and appendices and a table of contents at 23 pages, we nailed it. So, and pictures. So that's good too. So
they did a marvelous job. And I, on behalf of the congregation and the session, if I could be so bold to speak for everyone, just thank you to the Transition Task Force, to David for your leadership. You did the group did an amazing job, and the report is beautiful. So thank you. So I have either a question or a comment from Jeanette.
It's a comment, and I think I can speak for the task force when I say that David Teeger did a marvelous job being a real shepherd to this team. He took a lot of parts and put them all together in a way that was cohesive. And I personally thought he just did a really wonderful job, and I really am impressed. I'm happy with the document. I'm happy with what we came up with, but without David's ability to put it all together, it would not have been as good as it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. It was great working with you and with the whole team. It's like we have different ways of expressing things, and but it all came together, and it was really, really wonderful to share that way.
I have a question. This is John Walton.
Oh, hi, John.
Hi, David. I've seen a lot of mission studies over the years, and this is an excellent one. I think the issues that you've raised, the questions that are yet unanswered, are put forward to the congregation and to the session and to the PNC with a lot of clarity, and I congratulate you on that. I have a couple of questions, and let's just start with one. And that question would be, other congregations in downtown Wilmington, have you had any conversations, bring me up to running speed on what conversations you've had about the idea of joining another congregation like Sam's or Grace United Methodist or whatever, in a kind of dual linking of the future of, it seems to me that struggle is the nature of urban churches these days, and I'm just wondering if there's been any conversation with other congregations.
Yes, there have been. Mark, do you want to field this, or do you want me to sum up for you?
No, I'll take it. John, thanks for the question. We did start out quite early in the process by speaking with Father Andrews, David Andrews, the rector at SAM. That was a sort of natural connection because of the existing relationship that we have with that congregation through the monthly walks for peace and justice, and through the Explorers Forum follow-up that we've been doing. We also talked to Andy Jacob, the pastor at Hanover Street. As you know, he's been his church is not far from ours, and he's been active in community and in social justice issues for as long as he's been here, which is about 15 years. And he had some helpful insights for us. We also talked to Edwin Estevez, the pastor at Grace, and his colleague, Chelsea Spires. And through them and through some other connections, we've developed our participation in the Kitchen Incubator project. So these are all first steps, but our broader intention is to continue to try to develop those relationships in ways that coincide with the missions of those congregations and the mission of First and Central as it evolves.
That's good. We envisioned but didn't reach out directly to involving also Trinity Episcopal Church downtown, and we have hopes that perhaps we can even work with Ezzy Mount Carmel, which is the large African American United Methodist Church congregation down in the southeast quadrant of the city, so not too far from us. But if we could form sort of a natural alliance with that, perhaps also with Westminster, that isn't quite downtown the same way we are, but also certainly has interest in mission in the city, and that also comes from the Explorers Forum series that we had recently in working with them. So it's a great question.
Well, thank you.
All right, I think we have time for another one or two questions or comments. All right, well, seeing none, unless I'm missing a hand raised, I just, again, thank you, David, for the presentation this morning, too. I commented to Bill that you could be a designated presenter for the presbytery on explaining how the whole process works. Maybe you could sell it to them and make some money for the church.
That would be nice. Yeah, I expect that ours will become an example in the same way that we had the examples from Jenny's work at Newcastle Presbytery and with the work they did at Concord Presbyterian.
All right. Well, you said you had a final slide to share.
Just sort of the basics, saying that next week, Explorers Forum starts with a series on Clergy Conversations. So I certainly, in our report, we made note of the blessing that First and Central has of having, I think we listed 6, we didn't list them by name, but saying that there were currently about 6 retired clergy who have chosen to worship primarily at First and Central.
Actually, 7.
7? Okay, and how blessed we are. I think, and then we certainly made note of Shannon Hansen is also associated with church. But in terms of the Clergy Conversations, Explorers Forum is bringing these in. It's a 4-week series.
5 week.
5 weeks, which takes us through the end of the Explorers Forum year. And Sue, who is up first for next week?
Next week, Allison Halsey and Bill Hathaway are two of the 7, and they will be joining in the conversation that Ellen Roberts will be moderating. I will be hosting that one, but she will be guiding the conversation.
Super. Look forward to that. It's certainly a blessing to have all these people around. And it's certainly it was helpful to have Bill Hathaway with his experience on our Transition Task Force as well.
And I've had the benefit of seeing everybody's biography and gathering those to share with Ellen as we prepare. And there are some amazing folks that are represented in that group. So we hope you will join us next Sunday at 11 o'clock on Zoom, and then the weeks that follow. And thank you all for being here today. Enjoy the sunshine and take care.